cohort to try to look at those. And so it's really kind of a powerful framework. Some other things, looking at the human-animal interface. So we have studies where we keep track of people who, for example, work with pigs, and if their pig gets sick, we go get a sample from their pig, and then we get a sample from them and see how likely are they to get transmitted, how are they to get some of the pathogens that their livestock are getting. You know, we always blame the livestock, but the humans, most times what we find is the pig got stuff from the humans. The animals get stuff from the humans at least as much, if not more, than the humans give, or than the animals give it to the humans. So different things with avian flu, and I'm going to go through this rapidly. This is all just to give you an idea of kind of the sort of work that we're doing. And in wet markets, and look at interactions between humans and animals there. This is a study, not for the lighthearted, where you go to the slaughterhouse and get samples from the pigs right before they get slaughtered, and figure out how many of the pigs are infected with different influenza viruses. As I mentioned, pigs are especially important in terms of flu transmission. Changing gears a little bit here. So rodent-borne diseases, I'm particularly interested in rodent-borne diseases because a lot of the hemorrhagic fever viruses that I've studied over the years, especially Lassa, that's a rodent-borne disease. And one of the things happening in Peru is the building of what they call the Transoceanic Highway. So the Transoceanic Highway is cutting through the Peruvian Amazon and part of the Brazilian Amazon to build a road that gets out basically to Pacific ports. And so this, for better or for worse, is really transforming some areas of the Amazon. So of course it doesn't take very long. You put a road through, and then you know, you're going to have a village and a farm and different things happening, and crops coming up, and movement of populations. We're interested in some of the rodents that rodents and rodent-borne viruses, very briefly. So there's a very tight pairing usually between a particular type of virus and a particular rodent. So if you had if there was a forest that had particular types of rodents and usually lots of biodiversity in that forest, and now you change it to monoculture and you grow sugarcane, then you might have a very different population of rodents that come in there, and that population may carry a very different spectrum of pathogens. So we're looking at that by trapping rodents along different areas of the Transoceanic Highway and trying to figure out and putting that together with remotely sensed data and various different things. This is just an idea of, it's really not my area of expertise, but we have people who are trying to put all this in the context of electronic disease surveillance and to build the surveillance systems to be a little bit more modern and mobile. This is just a slide. I didn't have time to put this in English, but of some of the outbreak work we do. And so we do a fair amount of, you know, probably every week or other week there are outbreaks to work on. Most of them are relatively, you know, not minor things for the people who have them, but not unusual things. So a group A strep outbreak and, you know, kind of common things that circulate, and we assist with that sort of thing. And then the global, it's not a global, it's a global public health unit. So I must have made that slide. So this is sort of capacity building with different partners in different areas of Latin America. This was just to make the point. It's of some of the multiplex diagnostics. This is the TACMAN low density array that allows us to test for various things at one time, and comparing that with a different, these are sort of projects that we're doing in Peru, but they're kind of left over from my Tulane time and implementing, kind of combining the two. And in all these projects, of course, done with lots of different partners and from the United States and elsewhere, from Peru. So just a few slides to wrap up. And a group like this doesn't really need these points, I think, because I think your program, you know, if I'm talking to a group of medical students, they tend to really focus on the biology, you know, and so you need to get them sometimes beyond that. And you guys, I think, you probably have a biological background, but I think your program is already teaching you to focus on, you know, the importance of some of the social and political elements of this. And I remember at CDC, I'll get calls still, and young students and things in high school even saying, oh, I want to be a virus hunter, and what should I do? And I remember this one young girl, and she was like 16, and she said, and she was doing all the things, she was like, I'm volunteering at the hospital, and I'm, doing this, and I'm studying advanced biology, and what should I do, and all. And I said, I think you should study French. And she was completely disappointed that, that she, because she wanted me to say, you really need to learn about, molecular epidemiology and that sort of thing. And so I said, I think you should study French. And that was not what she wanted to hear, but kind of paying attention to the aspects of the beyond the biology is obviously important. So some take-home points on emerging infections. So a zoonotic interface is kind of where the action is at, unless you're into antibiotic resistance, and that is a whole area in itself, but not something that I really focus on a lot. Developing world is where the majority of emerging pathogens are coming from, and that's because that's the place where we still have the interaction, the most interaction between humans and what will soon be their dinner, right? So if you had chicken last night, you got it at the supermarket, but you didn't have much contact with a live chicken. But people who were in sub-Saharan Africa or other places in what we kind of lump together as developing countries, that's where that's happening. The response in the trenches is really the rate-limiting step. So even though it makes for good movies and it's kind of cool to say, oh, we get a team in 24, 48 hours, it's not really what it's all about. And like even if you said, why do I care what happens with populations in West Africa or South America? Not my problem. I'm an American. Romney. No, wait, I can't get into that. I'm an American, and so that's not my problem. We shouldn't be spending our money. But even if you say, well, the only thing I care about is what happens here and what comes to our borders, still the best thing is to invest in what's happening in the trenches overseas, because we have no way, basically, once it gets past the trenches, it's really hard for us to pick up and deal with, and kind of the cat's already out of the bag. Some development principles in these sorts of projects. It's a long-term venture, which is not easy because funding streams are not long-term, right? So, apply for NIH for a 20-year grant, and probably not likely. And these days, applying to NIH for any grant's pretty tough, right? Pay lines are low. It's a tough time to be a researcher, but nevertheless, you make a go of it. So you just kind of have to, in public health and research, you sort of have to have confidence that you can get stuff funded, and you get a grant for 3 years or 5 years, and you plunge into that, and you generate some data and some results, and then you have to have faith that, okay, then I'm going to get another grant, and it goes from there, and you work it out. These other points I think you guys are probably familiar with. If there's not some local ownership, if there's not buy-in, if you just say, okay, I want to go to Sierra Leone and do a project where I'm really interested in the genetic, the phylogeny of Lassa viruses. So let's get all these Lassa viruses and let's sequence them, and we can see kind of, hypothetically where these viruses came from. Great, but the people who are on the ground in Sierra Leone want more out of that. So if there's not something that's a little bit more pragmatic in terms of the science building their program and making people healthier there, you're not likely to have results that will last very long. Politics, of course, are always part of all this. This is that cave that I mentioned in the beginning for the Marburg hemorrhagic fever, where the gold miners were going in. These are the guys who guard the cave, basically, Congolese rebels. And so what they do, anybody wants to go in the cave, they have to, when they come out, some of the gold goes back to them. So that's kind of going on. I'll put a blatant plug-in for an NGO that I work with called Doctors for Global Health. And don't be confused, there's a lot of doctors, organizations, doctors with this and without that, and for and against, whatever. And this is a very small kind of mom and pop NGO that we work with that really focuses on a lot of the health and human rights issues. And I'll encourage you to get involved with that if you're so inclined. Check that out on the internet, dghonline.org. And kind of just the the different things. None of us have all these, you know, so you don't have to be perfect in everything. You can't know everything. When I'm talking to students, I teach virology and tropical virology and emerging pathogens, and as well as a human rights course at Tulane, and kind of telling people that really what the courses are about is not necessarily to make you an expert in one thing, but just to learn the language. You know, so you need to understand, if you're an epidemiologist, that's great, but you can't be saying, well, what's this PCR of which you speak? You know, you have to really understand a little bit the language, and like the laboratory people as well. So they know everything about the PCR and how to do stuff in the lab, but they have to know a little bit about what happens in the field. And when that doesn't happen, you can have lots of errors, and I can give examples of that, but we don't have time. But so these are, you know, just the important things, and some of it's obvious. You need to be smart. You know, you study hard and learn things, and that's kind of a basis that you have to have. Humanitarian heart. I hear like the medical students when I'm interviewing them say, oh, people told me like I should never say that I want to be a doctor or a public health worker because I want to help people. And I'm like, are you crazy? Like, why else would you want to be a doctor or a public health worker? That's why, if you don't want to do that, go into business. You know, that we have that's okay, right? We're like, it's a capitalist society and basically world, so it's okay to say, I want to be a millionaire, do this, I'm going to be a businessman or businesswoman. No problem, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're in healthcare, you should be in healthcare because you want to help people. Biomedical knowledge, language is really important, and just by kind of chance and serendipity, I had the occasion in my life to learn a couple languages. My English is getting better too, and so I can, you know, get by in French and Spanish, and I can't tell you how many opportunities that has opened, especially the French. You know, so there'd be, you know, an outbreak somewhere, and say there's an outbreak in Democratic Republic of the Congo or whatever in Gabon, and so we need someone who has a, you know, background in tropical medicine, and a bunch of people raise their hand. We need somebody who, you know, has some idea of public health and epidemiology, raise their hand, and we need someone who, you know, is ready to travel. A bunch of people raise their hand, and they speak French, and not too many people raise their hand. So there's really lots of opportunities that come through knowing languages, not through foresight of my own, but just kind of how the way things happen. All right, I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Does the CDC and NIH facility in Uganda have testing available?
They do, and I have to say that they do, and if you followed, there's of course an outbreak that was just declared over in Uganda, and then there's one on the other side of the border in Congo. It's not the same virus. It's not that they're spreading between the two places. But you know, years ago, after a very large outbreak in Uganda in 2000, 2001, at CDC, I was saying, well, we really need to set up diagnostics, you know, in this area. And people said, no, we just kind of do public health response, you know. So I'm laughing a little bit that some of the things I'm reading out of CDC is bragging how they set this up, and they did set it up, but it took them a long time to kind of see the light.
Nice place, right on the lake.
Yeah, you obviously know Uganda. It's UVRI, so it is a nice place. But although where the outbreak happened recently is not the area, but the previous outbreaks have happened in the north, where the Lord's Resistance Army is very active, and so lots of other impediments to doing things there. But
so is the CDC setting up any preventative approaches, like teaching people to cook on concrete slabs instead of the ground? Or?
Well, you know, it's a big world, right? So it's hard to have kind of preventative approaches for everything is hard to do. And it's a whole nother lecture and discussion. I don't know if you're familiar like with Alma Ata and comprehensive primary health care, and whether you should have vertical or horizontal systems. So there are, you know, generally what CDC and WHO are more oriented at vertical systems that are, say, okay, hemorrhagic fever work or TB or HIV and those sorts of things, which are relatively easy to criticize, I guess, and say, oh no, we should be doing, you know, much more comprehensive work, but that's pretty hard, you know, if you think anywhere, even if you just say one country, it's pretty hard to say, well, let's go into all the clinics and all the villages and all the places and try to set up a very comprehensive system. It's done best in places where it's relatively, you know, you have a relatively circumscribed area, so island nations can do it better. Cuba's done it well, but it's one thing. You can't necessarily amplify that and say, well, something that could be done in an island nation can be easily done in a much a much bigger population that has lots of migration in and out, and of course there's lots of reasons why Cuba doesn't have migration in and out too. That makes a challenge to it. So I don't want to give the impression that CDC, there's lots of good people at CDC and WHO, and there's a realization that there has to be capacity building, and it's especially hard for some things. One of the things that became a little bit difficult for me, and I know I'm going over time, but no one seems like they're rushing out, but it was, you have these relatively small outbreaks of Ebola. So the biggest outbreak that's ever been of Ebola, anyone want to take a guess how many cases? 425. So pretty small, right? So that's the biggest outbreak that there's ever been of a filovirus. There are many more people and data that I could show you of there are people who are infected and don't come to recognition. So there are more infections than that, but nevertheless, this is not a huge problem. And we spend a lot of money when there's an outbreak, and people kind of like this. It gets a lot of attention, and you send teams and all that. It's not that that's bad, but nevertheless, I would always kind of think about, really, should we be spending this much money? And the people who work in TB and HIV and other things say, that's money that should go elsewhere. And one of the things that felt comfortable to me and that I like about the capacity building thing is because you can then say, well, Ebola, I'm into like combating hemorrhagic fever viruses, and so let's put up to a laboratory that can do that, but the laboratory can be used for other things, right? So then you're getting a lot more bang for your buck and not just saying, okay, this is a completely vertical project about one particular relatively rare disease that happens to garner a lot of interest. And there are reasons it should garner a lot of interest. It's a relatively rare thing, but a place where an Ebola outbreak is happening, you can't really imagine something that's more turbulent to the society than that.
I guess in those terms, I'm wondering, so in Congo and other places you've worked, you've typically been working in a small set of sites on a kind of discrete frontier, whereas in Peru you seem to be working almost everywhere with probably not every social group, but a wide cross-section of one social group, let's say. What does it look like you're doing? Household surveys, you're doing clinic outreach, just kind of this whole range of things. What does I don't know if I want to use the word buy-in, but the relationship between you, the health system, and the populations, especially these household surveys. I don't know if these are recurring panels or if they're just one-offs, but is there a service relationship? Are you paying respondents, or is it?
We're not paying respondents, but I've been thinking a lot about that, about how we can, for two reasons. One is strategically. So how do you prevent fatigue in your population? So if you go and you're going and knocking on somebody's door for 3 years in a row and they're not getting a lot of it, and we do have people say, what am I getting out of this? Okay, I've let you do it. And especially after you start, putting somebody's had the swab shoved up their nose a few times. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not what you're looking, the kids don't like it too much, especially, and they're the group that often we're dealing with. So strategically, how we can keep people interested, and just also what's the right thing to do. So I have been thinking, what can we do that will keep people interested and also have them get some direct benefit from this. Of course, on a population basis, populations in general, they're not that interested in kind of continued altruism, right? So if you say you're going to be a subject in this study for 3 years, and this is going to be really good for the world to know more about influenza virus, they're like, okay, I've given enough to the world after a while, and they can go on without me, and that's understandable. I think there's a broader question there that, again, a whole nother hour discussion that we'll do another time, but we take for granted kind of the way we've set up this research world, that it's very partitioned. And so we go out and say, okay, I'm going to get a grant, or I'm going to get some money to do this research. And there's no, so somebody says, I'm going to make a vaccine. So I have a good vaccine. And in fact, there's lots of good vaccines that are out there for Ebola and other things like that in recent years. There's really been some good research on that. But of course, there's no system after that to take it anywhere. It's all just left to chance and left to economics. So, okay, there's a pharmaceutical company. No pharmaceutical company is interested in Ebola vaccine because the poorest populations on the planet have Ebola. So how much can they pay for that, right? And very few people really are ultimately at risk or are going to pay for that. They might do it if they're convinced, and they're not convinced. Okay, U.S. government might pay for it to vaccinate the troops because they're worried about bioterrorism and things like that. So we paid a lot a few years ago for a smallpox vaccine, even though smallpox is eradicated, right? So those sorts of issues. But is this really like a logical way to do things? Wouldn't it be more logical to kind of in the beginning put together, not everybody can do one group, the same thing, you know, so we can't have the same person who's going to make the vaccine is not going to be the person doing the field research to implement it. But couldn't we have some linkage in the beginning? And so we have, let's give this grant that has group who's going to do the basic science, produce a vaccine, and know when it comes out, okay, what's the plan then to move this on to this group? And that could involve NGOs and schools of public health and different groups that have, you know, tentacles into the field, and try to get a lot more for our investment rather than all this orphan stuff that we do. And okay, here's a vaccine, but you know, the science is good, but there's no real practical way to get that out into the field. So I think that's sort of, you know, a big question underneath that. It's hard, you know, we can't, none of us